All right, our third and final video over Chapter 11, Jarrett Chapter 11, the New Deal and the Great Depression, or actually the Great Depression and the New Deal. And this will be our third and last one. I believe we have 3 more slides for this particular video, and we'll be done with it. So let us begin. And we have another one of the alphabet agencies. We have the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Again, this also is in 1933. There are a number of these laws that were passed again during the first 100 days of the Roosevelt administration. And since that time, since the Roosevelt administration, every president is sort of judged on their first 100 days. What do they do? What do they fix? Again, assuming there is something to fix. And by and large, most incoming presidents believe there is something to be fixed. But anyway, get back to the topic at hand. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, 21 government-owned dams along the Tennessee River were built. The idea was to not only control flooding, but also to provide electricity in an area that was underrepresented with electricity. In fact, many parts of Tennessee and the surrounding states that benefited from the electricity created by the dams, none of these areas had ever had electricity before. And so not only were they being electrified, which is great, and that's good, but it also now creates a demand for certain products that are electrified. And so the TVA, another one of the more successful programs. I would say the TVA and the CCC are probably the 2 most successful programs. The TVA built dams that are still in use today. They are still used to control flooding in and around the Tennessee River, and of course to produce electricity, which was then sold quite cheaply at the time to provide a need for the people in that area. The Securities and Exchange Commission, oftentimes today referred to as the SEC, in 1934, was created to watch over the stock market, prevent fraud, and guard against another stock market crash. The 3 R's, relief, recovery, reform. Relief is short-term, providing money, direct monetary assistance, or jobs. Reform refers to creating an environment which would lead to economic growth. And then finally, reform was the idea of fixing the problems that led to the Great Depression to begin with. For example, an example of reform would be the SEC. So the SEC was created, to watch over the stock market. Its job was to watch the stock market. It was supposed to prevent fraud and guard against another crash, to ensure the events which led to the stock market crash in 1929 do not repeat themselves, are not repeated. The National Labor Relations Act, 1935, often called the Wagner Act, after the individual who proposed it in Congress, gave workers the right to form unions. It gave them the right to bargain collectively, and then to submit a grievance against their boss to a National Labor Relations Board, which was created by the National Labor Relations Act. So FDR was very pro-union. The Democrats still to this day are very pro-union. Unions are a very pro-Democrat party. Upwards of 95 to 98 cents of every dollar unions spend on politics goes to the Democrat Party. And so this is not something new. This has been around for 80 years or so, or longer. So the National Labor Relations Act gave workers the right, under the law, to form unions, to bargain collectively, and then if they wanted to submit a grievance, they could do so to a national board, not a local board. That, of course, opened the door for the growth of unions across the country. And, of course, unions did have many benefits. Through collective bargaining, they were able to get higher wages, better working conditions, on and on and on. And we've talked about these things previously. Now let's go to number 31, the Social Security Act, 1935. It provided workers with unemployment insurance, old age pension, and insurance if they died early. We'll come back and look at that in a little bit more depth in a few moments. Workers and employees each paid contributions to the fund that would then pay benefits. Again, primarily today, we think of Social Security as sort of an old age pension. There's more to it than that. Unemployment insurance goes with that. And then, of course, insurance if they died early. My high school girlfriend, her father died when we were freshmen. And from that point forward, shortly after that, she received a check from Social Security until she turned 21. I think the check was like $131. Not a lot of money, but keep in mind that this was 1974. And so once she and I are roughly the same age, I'm actually a few months older. Anyway, once she turned 16, got her license, a short time later she bought a car, and she used that money to pay off the car and buy insurance for the car, blah, blah, blah. The point of this is she got that money because she was the only underage child of her father. And so that is part of this insurance that was provided by the Social Security Act. Now, let's focus in on old age pension. Okay? What we generally think of when we think of Social Security is Social Security checks. Every month, if your job pays into Social Security, for example, my job as a teacher does not. I pay into teacher retirement system. Same concept, but done a little bit differently. So again, let's say you pay into Social Security. Your boss matches the funds. You pay total 12.6% of your salary. You pay half of it. Your boss pays the other half. 6.3 and 6.3 equal 12.6%. The money goes to D.C., goes in the front door of the Social Security building. Out the back door goes checks to those who, checks to those who are receiving benefits. Now, some of those benefits can be people who, again, are old age. My parents, for example, have been retired for a number of years. They're in their mid-80s. They receive a Social Security check every month. Possibly your grandparents as well. So whoever receives a Social Security check every month, that comes from the money that we send in monthly to Social Security office. They then pay out those checks to people receiving those Social Security checks, unemployment insurance, and then, of course, insurance for the minor children of those who paid into the system but died early. Now, the biggest problem with this whole thing is this right here. Let me clear this off. Okay. Hold on. And we're back. Okay. The biggest problem of all this is right here. Old age pension. It has become the belief of many that the government will take care of you when you retire. And no, that's not it. The idea was to provide a little bit of aid. You pay into the system today. The government helps those who are retired who paid in the system yesterday. Tomorrow, when you are retired, those who are working tomorrow will pay your benefits. It's not a savings account. You don't send money to Washington. They put it in a jar on a shelf with your name on it. It goes into the general fund. The money is spent going out in Social Security checks, unemployment insurance, whatever the case may be. Any money left over, and there has been money left over every month, all money left over is then sent to the general fund, and the government spends it. Whatever the government spends its money on, toilet paper, paper clips, nuclear weapons, hookers, whatever it spends its money on, the government spends it. Now, there is an IOU. The government, the Social Security office will write an IOU, IOU, blah, 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 and we're looking at $6-7 trillion over what we have spent. We have, since 1935, Social Security kicked in, we have overpaid the system $6 to $7 trillion total Every person, every month, every year. But all that money is not saved. It is then spent by the government in the general fund. And this is where it is the biggest ripoff. Not only do people believe the government will provide for them, so therefore they provide themselves less, they save less, they believe that it is money that they earned. In a sense, yeah, but no, it's not money that is saved for them. It's a pay-as-you-go system. People today are working to pay for those who are retired. People who retire tomorrow will depend upon those who are working. And the problem with this is a couple. Number one, people are living far longer today than in 1935. The average age of retirement in 1935 was 65. The average age of retirement today is still 65. The average life expectancy in 1935, on average, you live to be 63 years of age. More than half the people never reached retirement age in 1935. Today, average life expectancy is about 80. So you're living 15 years longer, on average, than a person who lived in 1935. So that means people are retiring at 65, and for 15 years they're receiving benefits, or at least a good chunk of them are. Another thing, in 1935, there were 33 people working for every person receiving benefits. 33 to 1. Today the ratio is a little less than 2 to 1. 2 people working for every person receiving benefits. That is going to be 1 to 1 within the next decade, and it will be shortly after that less than 1 person working for every person receiving benefits. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to do several things. You're either going to have to raise Social Security taxes, which no one likes, because the most politically active age group in America are elderly people, they're retired. So if there is let me rephrase that. So the most politically active group in America are the elderly, the people who are retired. And so if you cut their benefits, they're going to scream bloody murder. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. Someone came in and had to sign some forms. Let me walk through this again. The biggest problem with this is that the most active political group in the country are the elderly. So if you try to lower their benefits, which is one possibility, in order to take care of the quickly approaching, let me phrase that, quickly approaching shortfall we're going to have is to cut benefits. And of course, the elderly are going to scream like bloody murder. The easiest thing to do is to raise taxes. And of course, the least active, politically speaking, are the new workers, the 18 and 25. And so if something is going to be done, and something is going to need to be done within the next 20 or so years, they're probably just going to raise taxes. Now, again, it doesn't really affect me. I'm going to be well past retirement age by then. You, on the other hand, those students in this room and those who are listening to this and watching this, you're the ones who are going to have to pay more, or something else needs to be done. Anyway, that is Social Security. I've always thought it was one of the biggest rip-offs, one of the worst pieces of legislation ever passed, because, again, it promises something that it really can't deliver. Or let me rephrase that, they promise something that is becoming more and more difficult to deliver today. Number 32, aggregate demand. The total demand, in this case, there was a lack of demand to buy goods due to a lack of jobs and a lack of money. So the aggregate demand is the total demand. Okay? In this period of time, there was a lack of demand to buy goods because of a lack of jobs, and of course lack of jobs means a lack of money. As I mentioned earlier, when the stock market collapsed, you personally may not have been invested in the market, but it's a safe bet that your boss or your customers did. And since let's say, you just go with your boss did, since he has lost a great deal of money, he can no longer afford to keep all of his employees, and so he either reduces your hours or fires you. If you're your own boss, you have a small restaurant, and you don't invest in the market, but all your clients do, and they no longer have cash readily available. They can no longer go out to eat, so therefore they're not going to your restaurant. You cannot afford to keep your entire staff employed, so you cut hours or fire them. So the aggregate demand really is the total demand, but there was a growing lack of demand to buy goods due to the lack of jobs, which of course translates into a lack of money. Our last one on this page, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, 1932. Hoover established this entity to give emergency loans to banks. I mentioned Hoover did a few things late 31, early 32. He started to push through legislation and sign into law legislation to help businesses. He's a little bit too little, too late. And so in this case, this entity, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, was designed to give emergency loan to banks and businesses. Unfortunately, too little, too late, and I think that is the most important part of it right there. The idea was to provide loans to banks, to businesses, to keep them afloat, to keep working. But because it was passed so late in Hoover's presidency, if he'd have done this in early 30, a few months after the stock market collapsed, he could have saved his presidency and probably been reelected to a second term. But because he chose not to, again, because of his belief in laissez-faire economics, his belief in rugged individualism, he just didn't do enough to help the average American. By the time he started to help the average American, it was just too late. Number 34, brain trust. Now, this is a term used to refer to the people FDR selected to sit in his cabinet. Now, FDR chose a bunch of academics, as it states here, people from leading universities, institutions of higher learning, to sit in his cabinet. Well, what this means is while they may be experts in theory, not a lot of them had a lot of experience in the practical side. For example, brain surgery. I've never operated on someone's brain in my life, not with a knife, of course. Yeah, I mess with your minds, but that's another story altogether. I've seen it done on TV. I've watched a lot of, doctor shows. I've seen every episode of House. But does that mean I can go into an operating room today and cut open your head and fix whatever's wrong with your brain? No. Okay, I may have an idea of what needs to be done, but I have no practical experience. And that's the difference between theory and practical experience. FDR's cabinet was strong on theory, but weak on experience. And therefore, they made a lot of mistakes, which created lots of problems. Okay, 35, Frances Perkins, the first female member of a presidential cabinet. She served as the Secretary of Labor. Number 36, first 100 days. I mentioned this on a previous slide. FDR submitted a series of bills to Congress during his first 3 months of this term, the first 100 days or so. Almost, not all, but almost all the bills submitted were passed by Congress and then signed into law. And so that first 100 days under FDR was extremely important and became the benchmark for every president since. When the new president is sworn in January of 17, this is January 18th today, so a little over a year, 1 year and 2 days from today. And let's just say for fun, let's just say it's Ted Cruz. And again, he's from Texas. And okay, so let's say President Ted Cruz assumes office on January 20th, 2017. He will be measured to some extent by his first 100 days. What does he do? Now, Republicans are going to expect him to fix what Obama broke, just the way Democrats expected Obama to fix what George W. broke his first 100 days. Now, whether or not this is fair to the new president, it's not. Again, let's just say for argument that a Republican wins in the election this coming November of 2016. Well, he's going to inherit a Republican Congress, so he'll be able to do things. Let's say a Democrat, Hillary, wins the presidency in 2016, November 2016. She's going to inherit a Republican Congress who's not going to want to work with her. So that first 100 days is successful or not, according to the media, based on how much the president does. Unfortunately, the president really has little power because all he can do is submit or suggest. Those are horrible lines, I'm sorry. Let's see if we can fix that. The president can submit bills, suggest legislation, and of course, to whom? Congress. It's Congress's job to write the bills. So all the president can do is suggest, and if the opposite party controls the Congress from the presidency, oftentimes very little is done. By the way, that's not always a bad thing. Okay, let's move forward. Number 37, bank holiday. Banks were shut down across the country. Every bank in the country was shut down. And they were only permitted, and I think that's important, only permitted to reopen after the government inspectors found the banks to be financially sound. So the banks were all shut down and were only permitted to reopen if they were proven to be financially sound by government inspectors, using a criteria that they themselves created. A number of the banks were not allowed to reopen. Everyone who had money invested in those banks lost it. The Norris-Laguardia Act, 1932. Hold on. And we're back. Norris-Laguardia Act, 1932, prohibited the use of injunctions against peaceful strikes. An injunction is a legal term, which means you're not allowed to do it. You're stopped from doing it. There is a short-term stoppage. So if I'm the business owner and you, my students, are striking, and I go to court and get an injunction, then you must stop the strike. So this prohibited, it stopped the use of injunctions against those strikes that were peaceful. And I think the word peaceful is the key word in the whole definition. Number 39, Liberty League. This was a bunch of conservative groups who opposed FDR's approach to dealing with the Great Depression. FDR was a Democrat, conservatives are Republicans, and many people on the right, many Republicans felt that FDR and his programs were socialistic, which they were, and so they opposed him and what they thought was an undermining of the Constitution every chance they got. Number 40, Francis Townsend. He was a radical critic of FDR who believed the New Deal did not go far enough. And I think this is key, did not go far enough. So he wasn't a conservative. He wasn't a Republican. He believed that the New Deal did not go far enough. He wanted more. He was more socialistic than FDR. Now again, FDR was not really a socialist, but a number of his policies were socialistic. And because they were socialistic, because they were believed to be socialistic, the Republican groups, the conservative groups, were very much opposed to them. Okay, we got one more slide. We've gone over our time a little bit, and so I'll do this quickly. Another one of the critics of President Roosevelt was Huey Long, a U.S. Senator, Democrat from Louisiana, a former governor of the state of Louisiana. He promised, if elected, to give each American family, he was going to give each American family an income of $5,000 a year, which would be paid for by the rich. Now, this is very Hillary-esque, very Bernie Sanders-esque today. He essentially promised an income of $5,000 to each American family, which would be paid through the taxation of the rich. A third critic of the president, Father Coughlin, the father indicates that he is a Roman Catholic priest. He was. Father Coughlin gave radio addresses to millions. He had a following of millions of radio followers, calling for the nationalization of banks and utilities, which means that the government owns and controls them. Oh yeah, just like in a socialistic/communist country. He, Father Coughlin, was anti-Semitic, which means he didn't like Jews. He spoke out very negatively, derogatorily against Jews, and was ordered by the church to stop broadcasting. He was ordered by the church to stop his broadcast, partially because they were so anti-Semitic, partially because he called for the nationalization of banks and utilities. Utilities would be the water, the electricity, the garbage collection, those kinds of things. And so Coughlin, Hughes were just two of the three critics that we have discussed. Okay, and of course the one on the other page. Let us go back. Francis Townsend, right here at the bottom, of course. Okay, there's Francis Townsend. Townsend was a radical leftist. He was a radical critic of FDR. We add to that two more, Huey Long and Father Coughlin, who also were rather radical, very much leftist. And those two individuals made up a huge chunk of the anti-FDR rhetoric that you would see in the newspapers or hear on the radio. Okay, we got two more. Let's finish these up. Schechter Poultry versus the U.S. This is 1937. The Supreme Court ruled that the National Industrial Recovery Act was unconstitutional. Okay. Basically, the National Industrial Recovery Act gave the president certain powers to oversee businesses and unions, and the Supreme Court ruled it was unconstitutional because, as the court ruled, even in a national crisis, which the Great Depression was, the Congress could not, and this is the key word, could not, key phrase, could not give the president more power than allowed by the Constitution. If today's Congress overwhelmingly, with a unanimous vote, decide to give the power to declare war to President Barack Obama, that is unconstitutional because of the concept of separation of powers. So what Congress did in the National Industrial Recovery Act was give the president more power than he is allowed by the Constitution, and that is why the Supreme Court ruled the NIRA was unconstitutional. Our last one, FDR's court packing scheme, 1937. Now, the NIRA is the second law to be deemed unconstitutional. Remember, the first AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Act, was deemed unconstitutional by the courts. And so what FDR planned was to pack the members of or add to the court's numbers with his own people who support his plan. And so FDR attempted to add members to the Supreme Court in order to put his own supporters on the court, so that it would not rule, any more of his New Deal legislation to be unconstitutional. The plan was shot down by the court and by Congress and by the people. Everybody hated it. But the idea was that for every court member over a certain age, I believe it was 60, the president would be allowed to add an additional member. So if there are 5 members of the court over 60, then FDR could add 5 members. And the idea was he was going to pack the court with his supporters so that way none of his legislation, none of the legislation of the New Deal that he felt was important could be shot down ever again, because he would have a large majority on the court. Now, of course, this is unconstitutional. The president doesn't have that power. Now, again, Congress could do so. Congress could pass legislation along those lines because Congress has the power to do that. And we've talked about this previously. We're talking about the Constitution months ago. But the entire court packing scheme made FDR look petty. But ironically, this will be the last thing I have to say, ironically, there was never, after the court packing scheme in 1937, there was never another piece of New Deal legislation that was overturned by the Supreme Court. So did the court packing plan work? No, not the way he expected. Did it, however, create an atmosphere where a court or the court was going to overturn his decisions? No. So after the court packing plan Not once was one of his pieces of legislation overturned again. Okay, we have just finished Chapter 11 of Jarrett, the Great Depression, the New Deal, Part 3 of our vocabulary terms. We are done with this. Yay, yippee-ki-yay, bye.